Before we begin, make sure you're ready. Put on your headphones so you can feel every sound and enjoy the full story.
They say the desert keeps its secrets, but some secrets refuse to stay buried. Imagine standing before a sealed tomb, its entrance untouched for thousands of years, the dry Egyptian wind whispering warnings through the sand. Would you open it, knowing every stone is etched with curses meant to guard the dead? Or would you walk away, leaving the past where it belongs? There are objects in this world that carry more than history. Some hold whispers of a past that refuses to stay buried. They are relics, artifacts, and heirlooms that seem harmless at first glance, but concealed within them is a weight darker than time itself. They are not simply remnants of civilizations. They are traps of memory and vengeance, forged by hands that feared what would come after death and sealed with powers not yet understood. These are the stories of ancient curses, tales where the boundary between superstition and truth is tested, and where misfortune, tragedy, and unexplainable horror follow those who dared to touch what should have been left untouched. The first story begins in the deserts of Egypt, beneath the scorching sun that beats against the ruins of forgotten dynasties. For centuries, the tombs of the pharaohs have been revered and feared in equal measure. They were not merely graves, they were fortresses, vaults against time, and prisons for the spirits of kings. Sealed with spells and warnings carved in stone, they were designed to protect the dead from intrusion, and perhaps more importantly, to protect the living from the wrath of the dead. And yet, greed, curiosity, and ambition have always been stronger than fear. It was the early 1900s, the age when archaeology surged across the Egyptian sands. Foreign expeditions, financed by wealthy patrons and museums, raced to uncover treasures hidden for millennia. Luxor, the Valley of the Kings, and the shadowed deserts beyond became stages of feverish digging. Among these ventures, one small expedition unearthed more than just gold or artifacts. It awoke something that should have never been disturbed. The tomb was found not far from Luxor, tucked beneath layers of sand and stone, concealed in a valley overlooked by jagged cliffs. Unlike the more celebrated tombs of famous rulers, this one bore no name that had survived in record. An obscure pharaoh, erased from history, yet buried with care and wealth enough to suggest power once held. Its entrance was sealed, its hieroglyphs intact, untouched by weather or looters. When the stones were pried open, stale air rushed outward, air that had been trapped for thousands of years, carrying with it a dryness and a scent like ancient incense turned to dust. Inside, the explorers found walls lined with inscriptions. Torches revealed lines of hieroglyphs carved deep into the stone, warnings etched with deliberate, almost obsessive precision. They did not simply mark the life of the pharaoh, they threatened those who would intrude. They spoke of shadows that would cling to the souls of trespassers, of sickness that would spread like fire, of eternal unrest that would seep into the bones of the living. Yet the men laughed. To them, these were nothing but the superstitions of an ancient people, primitive beliefs carved into walls to frighten robbers. And so, they pressed on. Relics emerged from the darkness, golden amulets, funeral masks, scarabs of precious stone, jars that once held the pharaoh's preserved organs. But the most striking piece was discovered in a chamber at the far end of the tomb. A small statue of a falcon, carved in black stone, its eyes made of polished obsidian. It was exquisitely crafted, its feathers etched in detail, its talons sharp, its gaze piercing. One inscription nearby described it as the guardian of the dead king's soul, the vessel through which the pharaoh's spirit would watch over his eternal rest. The statue was boxed, crated, and eventually shipped overseas to a collector in London. To him, it was a prize, a jewel of antiquity, a symbol of his wealth and connection to the mysteries of ancient Egypt. He could not have known that along with the statue, something else had been carried from the desert, something that refused to be confined to stone. The curse did not stay buried. Within weeks of the tomb's opening, the first shadows fell. Members of the expedition began to fall ill. At first, it was dismissed as heat exhaustion or infections caught from contaminated water during travel. But the illnesses followed them home, across oceans, and grew in severity. High fevers, violent, delirium, sudden organ failure. Strong men wasted into hollow shells within months. One collapsed in the streets of Cairo and never awoke. Another returned to France, only to be found weeks later dead in his study, his body twisted as if from agony. Newspapers whispered of the curse of the falcon. At first, the reports were buried between skepticism and ridicule, dismissed as coincidence. But as more members of the team sickened and died, the story began to spread. Families spoke of sudden misfortunes, of madness in the nights, of dreams haunted by dark-winged creatures. Skeptics scoffed, but even they admitted the chain of tragedies was uncanny. And then, the falcon statue began its own history of ruin. The London collector displayed it proudly in his home, placing it in a grand hall surrounded by other treasures. But servants soon began to whisper of strange occurrences. At night, scratching sounds echoed from the walls as though claws were dragging along the plaster. Shadows flickered across the corridors, even when the lamps burned steadily. The collector's wife reported waking one night to see the falcon's obsidian eyes glowing faintly in the dark, staring directly at her. At first, these events were brushed aside as superstition, nerves, or imagination. But then came the first true tragedy. The collector's young son was found lifeless in his bed one morning. He had gone to sleep perfectly healthy, but never woke again. No cause of death could be determined. Doctors spoke of undetected heart conditions, sudden infant mortality, perhaps even poison. But none of these answers satisfied the grieving parents. The falcon's eyes seemed colder after that day, as though mocking the pain it had caused. The collector himself declined soon. After, once a proud and vigorous man, he began to wither. His body weakened, his flesh thinned, and his energy faded. No physician could diagnose his illness. They called it consumption or a wasting disease, but no treatment worked. In his final days, he raved about the statue, begging for it to be removed, insisting it was the cause of his family's ruin. His words were dismissed as the madness of a dying man. He died alone in his study, the falcon statue glimmering faintly under the gaslight beside him. When the artifact was eventually donated to a museum, the pattern continued. Curators who handled it spoke of a heaviness in the air, a sense of suffocating dread. Some complained of headaches, nosebleeds, and fatigue after standing near it too long. Others refused to work with it entirely. Visitors fainted inexplicably while gazing into its glass case. Guards patrolling at night swore they heard wings beating in the empty halls, the sound echoing through the museum corridors. One guard, driven to terror, resigned after claiming the falcon's statue had shifted position during his watch. Its talons pointed in a different direction than before. The statue's reputation grew. Some called it cursed, others dismissed it as hysteria. But the chain of events, the illnesses, the deaths, the inexplicable misfortunes, remained undeniable. The museum eventually locked the artifact away, rarely putting it on display, and only then with stern warnings to those who dared approach it. Historians debate still. Were these tragedies mere coincidence, the result of infections, toxins, or the psychological effects of suggestion? Or was the falcon indeed a vessel of something darker, an ancient soul bound in stone, seeking vengeance against those who disturbed its slumber? No answer has ever been found, but the falcon remains silent and watchful, its obsidian eyes unblinking, a reminder that what belongs to the dead should never be taken by the living. And yet, time and again, mankind ignores such warnings. And as the falcon waits in its case, cold and unyielding, one can't help but wonder, what price will the next curious soul pay? This was only the first story. From the deserts of Egypt, we move now to the mist-filled castles of Europe, where another cursed object awaits, a piece of jewelry forged in grief and bloodshed, destined to bring ruin to every hand that dares to wear it. Europe has always been a land where history and superstition walk hand in hand. The forests whisper with old stories, castles loom like sentinels over the centuries, and relics of forgotten families sleep in shadows. Among these relics, none has carved such a blood-soaked legend as the Bloodstone ring. It was forged in the mid-15th century by order of Lord Erhard von Kreutzen, a minor nobleman desperate to cement his family's place among the great dynasties of the Holy Roman Empire. Obsessed with recognition, Erhard believed symbols carried power. And so he demanded a ring unlike any other, a golden band crowned with a stone so deep and crimson that it seemed alive. The stone itself was torn from the earth of a mine near Bohemia. Miners later whispered of how their lanterns went out the instant the gem was uncovered, plunging them into suffocating darkness. One swore he heard a voice, low and guttural, chanting his name from within the rock. When the miners finally brought the gem to the surface, several fell ill, coughing, blood until they died. Their deaths were dismissed as accidents of poor air, but the villagers called it the Bloodstone. The ring, when finished, was exquisite. The stone glimmered with a wet sheen, as though a droplet of blood had frozen mid-fall. Lord Erhard wore it proudly, flaunting it at feasts and courts. But almost immediately, calamity began to take root in his household. His wife, Lady Adela, was struck with a wasting sickness. Physicians brought leeches, herbs, and prayers, but nothing could restore her. Within months, her body was reduced to a fragile husk. On her final night, she raved of seeing black figures at her bedside, whispering into her ears while her husband slept. She begged Erhard to destroy the ring before she died. He refused. Days later, Erhard himself began to unravel. He wandered the halls muttering, speaking to empty air, his eyes darting to corners no one else dared look at. Servants began abandoning the estate, whispering that they heard footsteps pacing the corridors long after their master had retired, or saw shadows stretch unnaturally across the stone walls. One storm-lashed morning, Erhard was found dead in his chambers. His body was twisted, his mouth frozen in a silent scream, and his hand clutched so tightly to the ring that the gold had embedded deep cuts into his palm. His death marked the beginning of the Bloodstone's legacy. But it did not end with him. The ring was pried from his corpse by a cousin who coveted its beauty. He wore it at his wedding, ignoring the superstitions. That same night, his bride was found floating lifeless in the castle well, her face pale, her eyes wide as though she had seen something unspeakable before she drowned. From then on, each owner met tragedy. A Hungarian baron who wore it was thrown from his horse, his skull shattered on the hunting grounds. A French duke who purchased it at auction burned alive when his chateau caught fire in the middle of the night, the only object left untouched. In the ashes was the ring, gleaming red among the blackened rubble. By the 18th century, the ring's reputation had grown infamous. Nobility spoke of it in whispers at banquets, some scoffing, others shivering. Yet ambition and arrogance drove men to claim it still. Each time the outcome was the same: death, disaster, despair. One of the most chilling accounts came from Vienna. The Countess von Mertens unveiled the Bloodstone at a masquerade ball, laughing at the rumors as she raised her hand for all to admire. Witnesses recalled how her laughter suddenly broke into shrieks. She collapsed in the middle of the ballroom, clawing at her chest, her silk gown staining with blood that seeped from her mouth. Physicians rushed to her aid, but she was gone before they could even lift her from the floor. The crimson stone on her finger gleamed under candlelight, brighter than ever. In the 19th century, it passed into the hands of Heinrich Krüger, a wealthy industrialist. He mocked the curse, declaring to journalists that old stories are for old women. But within a year, his fortune crumbled. A factory explosion killed dozens of workers. His wife was found dead in her study, her wrists slit. His eldest son was torn apart in a train derailment so violent that they buried only fragments of his remains. Krüger himself died penniless, wandering the streets, muttering of voices that never left him alone. The ring was found in his pocket, pristine. Over time, scholars and occultists began to speculate that the Bloodstone was no mere jewel. Some argued it was not a stone at all, but hardened blood, perhaps of those miners who died bringing it forth, perhaps of something far older. Others whispered it was a vessel, a prison for something that had been bound within it centuries ago, and that each new owner only fed its hunger. Unlike other cursed objects, the Bloodstone ring did not kill in one predictable way. It adapted. To one, it brought madness. To another, fire. To another, drowning or plague, or loss so unbearable it shattered families forever. The curse was intelligent. It watched, it chose, and it delivered the ruin most suited to its victim. In modern times, the Bloodstone has surfaced only in fragments of rumor. Some claim it was lost in the bombing of Dresden during World War II, buried under rubble. Others whisper it lies in a vault in Switzerland, in the possession of a collector too afraid to wear it, but too greedy to let it go. But one fact remains true in every account. The Bloodstone never disappears. It waits. It calls to those with pride enough to think they can master it. And when they do, it consumes them, slowly, intimately, until nothing is left but grief, ashes, and the faint glimmer of crimson in the dark. And if you ever see a golden ring set with a stone red as blood, be it at an auction, a market, or in a dusty drawer, you must remember this: it is not a jewel, It is a witness to centuries of death, a relic that feeds on those foolish enough to claim it. And it is still out there, waiting. In the heart of Louisiana, where the air hangs heavy with humidity and the faint notes of jazz echo from shadowed alleyways, lies the city of New Orleans, a place alive with rhythm, history, and secrets. It is a city that dances on the edge of life and death, where celebrations like Mardi Gras spill color into the streets, yet the cemeteries loom just as grand, with their tombs raised above the ground like miniature marble palaces for the dead. People say that here, the veil between worlds is thinner, that spirits walk freely among the living. And for those who listen closely, the city whispers its darkest tales through the creak of shutters, the rustle of Spanish moss, and the echo of footsteps where no one walks. Among its countless ghost stories, one object has earned a reputation so sinister that even the bravest hesitate to speak of it: the haunted mirror of the LaLaurie Mansion. The mansion itself, standing proud on Royal Street, is a place woven into the nightmares of New Orleans. In the early 1800s, it belonged to Madame Delphine LaLaurie, a woman whose beauty and social charm masked a cruelty beyond comprehension. Behind her elegant facade, she committed acts of unspeakable horror against those enslaved in her household. When the truth was discovered after a fire, angry crowds stormed the mansion. What they found inside scarred the city's history forever. Chambers of torture, human suffering immortalized in chains, cries that seemed to linger long after the victims were gone. In the aftermath, many items were stripped from the house, as though people believed removing the objects might strip away the darkness. But some objects, it seemed, carried the darkness with them. One of those was a tall, ornate mirror, gilded in gold that had dulled with age but still shimmered faintly when light struck it. At first it seemed nothing more than an antique, albeit one tied to a house of horrors. Yet whispers began almost immediately. Servants tasked with cleaning the mirror noticed strange things, their reflections lagging slightly, as if they moved in two separate times. They swore their eyes glowed too dark, too hollow in the reflection. At night, when no one was near it, faint smudges appeared on the glass as though pressed by hands from the inside. Over time, those whispers grew into chilling accounts. Guests who dared to gaze into the mirror claimed they saw more than their own faces. They described figures looming behind them, gaunt, skeletal, their skin pale as wax. Some even saw eyes staring back, eyes filled with suffering, pressed close to the surface of the glass, as though begging to be freed. One story tells of a young maid who fainted after claiming the mirror showed her chained and screaming inside the LaLaurie attic. When she awoke, she refused to ever step foot in the mansion again. The legend followed the mirror as it passed from owner to owner. Every family who kept it seemed to fall victim to misfortune. A wealthy couple in the late 19th century purchased the mirror as a curiosity. Within months, their health declined. Both wasted away, pale and feverish, until they died within days of each other. The doctor who examined them wrote in his notes that they looked as though life had been drained straight from their bones. Later, in the 1920s, when the mansion was briefly converted into apartments, the mirror was said to hang in the hallway. Tenants often avoided walking past it at night, claiming they heard faint tapping on the glass. One man, emboldened by drink, placed his hand against it. He later swore he felt another hand press back, cold and trembling. Weeks later, he disappeared without a trace. His room left in perfect order, as if he had simply walked out and never returned. Some whispered that the mirror had claimed him. By the mid-20th century, the mirror found its way into an antique shop in the French Quarter. There, it became infamous among locals and tourists alike. People dared one another to stand before it. Some laughed it off, brushing the experience aside. But more than one visitor staggered out of the shop pale and silent, refusing to say what they had seen. One particularly chilling account involves a man in the 1960s. He stood before the mirror for several minutes, staring intently. Suddenly, he let out a scream, clutched his chest, and collapsed to the ground. Witnesses rushed to him, but he was already gone, dead of a heart attack. Those who were there swore his last words were, "They're pulling me in." Another story tells of a woman who gazed into the mirror and saw her own reflection, aged, skeletal, her lips pulled back in a lifeless grin. Shaken, she left the shop and refused to return. Just weeks later, she was killed in a car accident. The undertaker who prepared her body claimed, without knowing the story, that she looked exactly as she had described. Paranormal investigators who studied the mirror suggested it was no simple object, but rather a portal. Mirrors, they argued, are natural gateways, thin barriers between this world and the next. If the LaLaurie Mansion's horrors left behind restless spirits, perhaps they found themselves bound to this surface of polished glass, unable to move on, unable to escape. The mirror, they said, was not reflecting, but containing. And those who gazed too long risked having their own essence caught and stored within its depths. Workers tasked with moving the mirror often reported their own unease. Some said they felt watched, even when the mirror was covered and sealed in a crate. Others claimed faint scratching noises came from inside the box, as though someone, or something, was trying to claw its way out. A delivery man once refused to touch it altogether, saying he had dreamt the night before of being trapped inside, pounding on the glass as people ignored his screams. Where the mirror resides today is uncertain. Some say it was destroyed. Its glass shattered, its frame melted down as if obliterating it would free whatever was inside. But others whisper it still exists, tucked away in a private collection. Perhaps hidden in a dusty attic, perhaps hung quietly in some forgotten room where the curious might stumble upon it and unleash its horrors again. The haunted mirror of New Orleans is more than just a relic. It is a reminder of what cruelty leaves behind, of the energy imprinted on the world when suffering runs too deep to fade. Some believe objects carry memories, absorbing what unfolds around them. And when those memories are soaked in agony, they fester, becoming something far more dangerous. For those who have stood before the mirror, one detail unites them all. Once they looked into its surface, they never trusted their own reflection again. They glanced over their shoulders in bathrooms, avoided mirrors in the dark, and some even covered every reflective surface in their homes. Because once you have seen a face that isn't your own looking back at you, you can never be certain of what lies on the other side of the glass. And yet, the mirror is only one cursed object, one whisper of history's darkness. Across oceans and centuries, in the frozen lands of Scandinavia, another relic waits, not polished or ornate, but forged in iron and drenched in blood, a sword cursed by betrayal and soaked with the screams of warriors who raised it. Where the mirror reflected despair, the sword carved its curse into every hand that wielded it, and its story is no less terrifying. Far to the north, where winters bite deep and the sea freezes into jagged sheets of ice, the Vikings carved their names into history with iron, blood, and fire. These were warriors who believed themselves, chosen by the gods, bound by fate and oaths, living in longhouses where smoke clung to the rafters and the smell of salt and blood hung heavy in the air. Their blades were not just tools of war, but symbols of their power, their pride, and the gods they swore to serve. Yet among the many swords that gleamed in the northern sun, one blade was remembered not for its victories, but for the shadow it carried. A sword so feared that even in whispers, its name was spoken with dread, the Viking Sword of Doom. Its story begins in the 9th century, during the height of Viking raids when their dragon-headed ships ruled the seas. The sword was forged in a fire that was said to have burned for 3 nights and 3 days, stoked with wood from sacred groves and fed with offerings of animal blood. The blacksmith who created it was no ordinary man. He was said to be half mad, his mind fraying from whispers only he could hear. Some said he was cursed by Odin himself, others that he had bargained with darker forces lurking beyond Midgard. Whatever the truth, when the final blow of his hammer fell, he did not quench the blade in water but in the blood of a living man. The scream that rose that night was said to echo across the fjord, and those who heard it swore they never forgot it. The first to wield the sword was a powerful chieftain, a man feared by all who heard his name. With the cursed blade in his hand, he seemed unstoppable. In battle, he carved through shields as if they were no more than bark. Enemies broke before him, and villages burned in his wake. His men followed him not just out of loyalty, but out of terror. For the sword gleamed with a hunger that seemed alive. Yet victory did not last long. Days after his greatest conquest, the chieftain was found lifeless in his longhouse, sprawled across his bed. There were no wounds on his body, no poison in his cup. Yet his mouth was frozen in a scream, his eyes wide as though he had glimpsed something unspeakable in the darkness. His men feared to touch the sword, but greed and ambition are stronger than fear. One after another, warriors claimed it, and one after another, they fell. A man drowned in shallow water, though he was a skilled swimmer. Another was crushed by a roof beam that split without storm or cause. One was struck by lightning on a clear day. His body charred while the grass around him remained untouched. Each death carried with it the stench of something unnatural, something that laughed at human strength and courage. Soon the sword's reputation spread like wildfire. It was said the blade demanded blood, and if it did not taste the blood of enemies, it would turn against its master. Warriors who carried it were marked men, destined to die by violence, no matter how secure their power seemed. By the 11th century, its curse had grown infamous. No warrior wished to inherit it, no jarl wished to offer it as a gift, for to touch it was to invite ruin. Yet human greed never dies. A powerful jarl, swollen with ambition, took the sword for himself. He swore that its power would bring him endless victory, and for a time it seemed the curse slept. His enemies fell swiftly, his ships returned laden with plunder, and his name spread across the seas. But curses are patient, waiting for the moment when pride blinds its victim. On the eve of his greatest conquest, as his men feasted and drank by firelight, chaos erupted. The air turned heavy. The flames roared unnaturally high, and tents caught fire as though the night itself sought to consume them. In the confusion, the Jarl was cut down, not by his enemies, but by his own men, who later swore they were seized by a madness they could not explain. When the ashes cooled, the sword lay untouched, gleaming as though the fire had polished it anew. Centuries passed, and the sword drifted in and out of history. Always, it left behind death and ruin. A tale from the 17th century tells of a farmer who unearthed it while plowing his fields. Believing it to be treasure, he brought it home and showed it proudly to his family. Within 2 weeks, all was lost. His livestock sickened and died. His home burned in the night, and his children were taken by fever. Only the farmer remained, wandering through the ashes of his life until, unable to bear the weight of the curse, he ended his own life. The blade resurfaced again in the 19th century when it was placed in a Scandinavian museum. At first, it was admired as a relic of Viking craftsmanship, displayed proudly in a glass case where visitors could marvel at its sharpness and design. Yet soon, strange reports began to circulate. Visitors claimed they felt dizzy or nauseous when they stood before it. Some grew pale and shivered as though a cold hand had brushed against their skin. Guards who patrolled the museum at night swore they heard faint screams echoing in the darkness, as though the sword itself remembered the voices of the dead. The curators who handled it fared no better. One died when a beam collapsed suddenly in his home. Another was seized by a seizure in the museum itself, his body twitching on the marble floor until life left him. Yet another was struck down by a sudden illness that doctors could not explain. Whispers grew louder, and the sword was eventually locked away in a vault, hidden from the public eye. Still, even behind steel doors, the curse did not sleep. Those who knew where it was kept swore that at night, when the museum was silent, they could hear a faint humming from the vault, as if the blade longed to be touched again. Where the sword rests now is uncertain. Some say it remains hidden in a locked storeroom, sealed away by curators too fearful to admit they hold it. Others claim it was taken deep into the wilderness and buried beneath earth and stone, hidden so that no one would ever wield it again. But history teaches us one truth: nothing stays buried forever. The Viking Sword of Doom stands as a reminder that power drawn from darkness carries a price no mortal can pay. It does not matter how strong the arm, how fearless the warrior, or how high the ambition. Once steel is quenched in blood and bound with a curse, it ceases to be mere metal. It becomes something else. A living hunger, a vessel of ruin, a whisper from the shadows that promises glory but delivers only death. And as the world moved on, as empires rose and fell, the curse of the sword remained, lingering like a shadow that refuses to fade. From the deserts of Egypt to the castles of England, from the voodoo-haunted streets of New Orleans to the frozen north, cursed relics remind us that the past is never truly gone. Far to the east, in the lush temples of India, another relic waits, a statue of serene beauty, its face calm, its hands folded, but its history blackened with a curse so dreadful it brought ruin not just to men, but to an entire empire. In the heart of India, where the air hums with chants and incense thickens the atmosphere of temples, there exists a tale whispered with trembling lips, a tale of an idol whose dance is said to carry the rhythm of death. The dancing idol of India, small enough to sit in a man's hands, yet vast enough in presence to consume entire lives, has remained one of the most chilling relics in the history of cursed artifacts. Legends tell that the idol was born in an era when devotion and dread walked hand in hand. It was sculpted from bronze, its form capturing a divine dancer frozen mid-motion, the delicate arch of her arms poised like flowing rivers, her slender foot balanced on the edge of eternity. But unlike ordinary statues, this idol was consecrated, not with prayers alone. Its creation, the priests said, demanded blood. Sacrifices, human or animal, the details are blurred, were performed so that the spirit of the goddess herself might dwell within it. Some say that in those rituals, the dancers who performed before the idol collapsed lifeless, their energy absorbed by the bronze, binding the idol to an eternal, unseen rhythm. The goddess it represented was one of duality, creator and destroyer. To her followers, the idol was alive. For centuries, villagers and devotees approached the temple barefoot, carrying garlands of marigold and bowls of sweet offerings. They whispered their prayers, their eyes carefully avoiding the jeweled gaze of the idol, for they believed to look too long into those inlaid eyes was to see more than oneself. It was to glimpse an ancient hunger. Still, the idol was revered, guarded fiercely, until greed and arrogance intervened. During the colonial age, when foreign powers stripped temples and palaces of their treasures, a British officer stationed in the south of India learned of the idol. Locals warned him, their voices tight with desperation. This was not treasure but tether, not beauty but burden. He laughed at their warnings. Superstitions, he called them. To him, the idol was nothing more than a prize, proof of conquest. Under Da, the cover of night, soldiers carried it from the temple, their torches flickering as if reluctant to light their theft. One soldier, it was said, stumbled and broke his leg before they even left the temple gates. Another reported hearing faint, ankle bells chiming though no dancer was near. The officer dismissed these as coincidence. When the idol arrived in his estate in England, the curse began its slow, inevitable dance. The household servants were the first to notice. Footsteps echoed in the corridors long after everyone had gone to sleep. At times they swore they saw shadows flicker across the walls, moving in fluid rhythm, as though invisible dancers circled them. The officer himself became obsessed. He spent hours locked in his study with the idol, staring at it as if caught in a spell. His hands trembled, his skin grew pale, and he confessed in drunken whispers that he saw the statue change when he looked away. The foot once lifted in balance had shifted. The tilt of the head was different. The dancer was not still. It was finishing a performance unseen by mortal eyes. His wife fell ill with a fever no doctor could explain, her skin burning, as though she had stood too close to fire. At night, the daughter of the house screamed herself awake, insisting that a bronze woman stood at her bedside, swaying to music no one else could hear. Within a year, the officer himself was dead. His body was found twisted in his study, limbs contorted in unnatural positions, as though caught mid-dance. His face was frozen in a rictus of horror. And there beside him the idol sat calmly, its jeweled eyes gleaming in the dim candlelight. But the curse did not rest with him. Like a dark melody, it sought new dancers. The idol was passed from collector to collector, each eager to own what they thought was a rare artifact. One man found his fortune evaporating overnight, investments failing in ways too precise to be chance. Another was mangled in a carriage accident, his body broken beyond recognition. Another fell into madness, raving about music no one else could. Here, until he murdered his family and took his own life. Each owner spoke of the same things: the faint sound of ankle bells, the soft rhythm of drums, and a figure glimpsed in the corners of their eyes, forever swaying. By the mid-20th century, the idol reached a museum in London. At first, it was placed proudly in a gallery, but visitors complained almost immediately. They described an oppressive weight pressing on their chests as they stood. Before it, a suffocating heaviness that made breathing difficult. Some said they felt hypnotized, unable to look away. Others confessed to seeing the bronze dancer blink. Guards refused to patrol the halls at night, reporting faint music that rose and fell like distant chanting. One curator collapsed without, warning as he attempted to polish the statue, and a night watchman suffered a breakdown, insisting the idol had walked across the gallery floor. Soon after, the museum quietly removed the idol from public view, and then, like all cursed objects, it disappeared. Some say it was returned to India under secrecy, hidden in a temple once again, its guardians ensuring no foreign hand would disturb it again. Others whisper it still sits in a locked vault beneath the museum, too dangerous to display but too powerful to destroy. A darker theory lingers, that it was melted down, erased from history. But those who believe in the divine argue otherwise. A vessel of a goddess cannot be destroyed by fire, for fire itself is but another form of her dance. The curse of the dancing idol reminds us of an eternal truth. Sacred relics are not trinkets to be stolen or displayed. They are vessels, binding centuries of belief, suffering, and worship. To possess them is to invite not admiration, but consequence. The idol danced not for beauty, but for balance, creation and destruction intertwined. And those who took her from her rightful place were forced to join the dance, step by cursed step, until it ended in ruin. Yet the tale does not stop there, for as chilling as the story of the idol may be, it is but one verse in the symphony of cursed relics scattered across the world. Far away in the icy landscapes of Russia, another object has lingered in whispers for centuries. Not a statue, nor a weapon, but a book bound in strange leather, filled with words that cannot be deciphered, yet powerful enough to drive those who read them into madness. They call it the Book of the Dead Monastery, and like the idol, its curse waits patiently for the next soul foolish enough to open its pages. Deep within the cold, desolate lands of Russia lies a tale of parchment, ink, and insanity. Unlike cursed weapons or statues, this relic does not appear threatening at first glance. It is merely a book. Yet, across centuries, monks, scholars, nobles, and wanderers have whispered of its power, calling it the Book of the Dead Monastery. Those who dared to touch it often regretted doing so, and those who read it never remained the same. Its exact origins are shrouded in uncertainty, buried beneath layers of rumor and fractured history. Some historians claim it was created in the 14th century, when heretical sects spread across Eastern Europe, mixing forbidden rites with fragments of Christian mysticism. Others suggest it is far older, a relic of forgotten pagan traditions that predated even the rise of the Orthodox Church. The most enduring account states that the book was discovered within the ruins of a burned monastery near Novgorod. The survivors of that fire swore the blaze erupted suddenly and unnaturally, leaping across stone as easily as timber, consuming the holy sanctuary in a storm of black smoke. And yet, when the embers cooled and the ashes scattered, one object remained untouched. At the very center of the ruined altar, as if deliberately preserved, lay a volume bound in cracked, dark leather that smelled faintly of decay. When the book was first opened, its nature was unlike anything known to man. The pages were brittle, thick, strangely resistant to age, and covered in a script no one could translate. Even more disturbing were the drawings. Some showed figures twisted into impossible contortions, mouths stretched too wide, eyes staring. Without lids, limbs bending at unnatural angles. Others bore intricate designs of symbols, circles within circles, spirals and lattices that seemed to shift when stared at for too long, as if alive. The monks who found it argued bitterly over its meaning. Some called it the work of a madman. Others, with voices lowered and trembling, whispered that it was not the hand of man at all. The first to attempt translation was a devout monk known for his discipline and unwavering faith. He believed the manuscript concealed sacred wisdom, hidden knowledge of angels or divine mysteries. For weeks he pored over its pages, hunched beneath the flickering light of his candle, scratching notes in the margins of parchment. But slowly, his habits began to change. He neglected his duties, refused food, and avoided conversation. His fellow monks often heard him whispering in languages they could not recognize, muttering phrases that made their ears ring and the air feel heavy, as though the words themselves carried weight. At night, he could be heard scratching symbols onto the walls of his cell, carving them into wood, into stone, even into his own skin. Then, one morning, he was found lifeless. His body lay bent backward in an arc no spine could endure, his arms twisted, his face frozen in a grotesque grin that stretched wider than any human mouth should. Around him, scrawled in frantic repetition, were the same symbols that filled the book. His death was enough for the monastery to seal the volume away, locking it behind iron doors and swearing never to speak of it again. But centuries have a way of eroding vows, and curiosity is never buried for long. In the 18th century, the book resurfaced, this time in the hands of a Russian nobleman who dabbled in the occult. He believed the manuscript contained secrets of immortality, incantations to prolong life. Servants later testified that he spent weeks in isolation, locked in his study, the glow of his candle burning at all hours. They heard him murmuring, sometimes laughing, sometimes screaming. He grew thin, his skin stretched tight against his bones, his eyes sunken as though something inside him was feeding on his vitality. When authorities finally entered the manor, they found his body slumped over the desk. His eyes had been gouged out, his fingertips bloody from clawing at his own face. The book remained on the desk, unscathed, its pages dark as if the ink itself had thickened into shadow. It was hidden once again, but the world was changing, and wars brought forgotten relics into light. During the chaos of the Second World War, soldiers scavenging through abandoned monasteries discovered it beneath loose floorboards. One officer took it, thinking it valuable. Within weeks, his comrades noticed his strange behavior. He carried the book everywhere, whispering to it, smiling at it, even answering it as though it spoke back. His end was sudden and shocking. One winter morning, without explanation, he walked calmly into a frozen river, the book pressed against his chest. His body was never found, but when the ice thawed months later, the book appeared on the riverbank, perfectly dry, as though the waters themselves had refused to claim it. After the war, scholars and researchers tried to study the volume under controlled conditions. Their testimonies are perhaps the most chilling. One reported sudden migraines that struck only when he attempted to decipher the writing. Another swore that when photographed, the symbols did not appear as ink but as moving shadows that writhed across the page. Several who touched the book, even briefly, complained of vivid, recurring nightmares, visions of cloaked figures chanting in endless halls, skies torn apart by black fire, and corridors lined with faces screaming soundlessly from the walls. Over time, a disturbing pattern emerged. Those who studied the book for more than a few hours either vanished, went insane, or died in grotesque and unexplained ways. Some became violent, attacking their colleagues in bursts of madness. Others fell silent, staring blankly for days before collapsing lifeless. A few left behind journals filled with desperate scrawls of the book's symbols, repeated obsessively until the pages became unreadable masses of ink. None lived long enough to offer answers. Theories arose to explain its nature. Some believed it to be a remnant of necromancy, a manual of rituals designed to summon forces from beyond. Others suggested it was not a book at all, but a prison, its pages the bars of a cage designed to hold something unspeakable. To read the book, they argued, was to loosen those bars, to let the imprisoned darkness seep through, even if only for a moment. Today, whispers claim the Book of the Dead Monastery rests in a sealed Russian archive deep within St. Petersburg. Official records deny its existence, yet there are stories of a restricted section where researchers are forbidden, where guards patrol at all hours, and where the temperature is kept unnaturally low, not to preserve the paper, but to suppress what lies within it. Some say the book hums faintly when approached, vibrating like a heartbeat. Others insist it is no longer there, having slipped once again into private hands, waiting for the next fool to open its cover. What is certain is this: every person who has sought its knowledge has paid a price. Some truths are not meant for human eyes, some pages are not meant to be read, and still the book endures, patient, silent, waiting. But the Book of the Dead Monastery is only one among many cursed relics. For not all dangers are hidden in shadows and blood-stained pages. Some are carved into jewels that glitter with fatal beauty, treasures so alluring that even kings and conquerors could not resist them. And among these, none is more infamous than the jewel said to carry death to all who possess it. A stone that has passed from empire to empire, leaving ruin in its wake. The cursed treasure known to the world as the Koh-i-Noor diamond. Some curses are written in blood, some are carved in stone, but few are as dazzling or as deadly as the curse said to lie within the Koh-i-Noor diamond, weighing in at over 100 carats in its earliest known form. This breathtaking jewel has been called the Mountain of Light. Even its name evokes majesty, as if the stone itself were carved from the very heart of the sun. Yet behind its brilliance lies a history steeped in conquest, betrayal, and death. Unlike ancient grimoires buried in forgotten libraries or haunted monasteries lost to time, the Koh-i-Noor is no hidden relic. It rests today in plain sight, displayed proudly as part of the crown jewels of Britain. But for centuries, rulers who possessed it found themselves undone, as if the diamond itself demanded blood for every hand that touched it. The earliest confirmed records of the Koh-i-Noor date back to 13th century India, though whispers claim it was mined as far back as 5,000 years ago, during an age when gods still walked among men. Legends suggest it was once placed in the eye of a statue of a Hindu deity, worshipped not merely as a gem, but as a fragment of divine essence. In that form, it was a symbol of blessing, revered as something sacred. But when the stone was pried, Loose, torn from its holy resting place by human greed, its purity turned to poison. What had been a vessel of divine protection became a harbinger of calamity. From that moment forward, the diamond was not a blessing, but a curse. The first known warning about the gem was etched in Persian chronicles, a chilling prophecy preserved. Through centuries, he who owns this diamond will own the world, but will also know its misfortunes. Only God or a woman can wear it without fear. And so the cycle of blood began. In the 14th century, the diamond entered the possession of the rulers of Delhi. What followed was a grim pattern that would repeat endlessly across generations. Within years, dynasties crumbled. Assassinations, betrayals, and bloody coups echoed through palace walls. Each ruler who sought to claim the Mountain of Light was swallowed by darkness. The diamond never changed hands by peaceful bargain or trade. It was seized in conquest, ripped from the dying hands of kings and warlords. Always, the jewel survived. Always, its brilliance endured. But those who claimed it never did. The jewel's most infamous turn came in 1739, when the Persian warlord Nader Shah swept across India in a storm of violence. His invasion of Delhi remains one of the most brutal sackings in recorded history. The city was drowned in fire and blood, its treasures looted, its people slaughtered. Among the spoils of war, Nader Shah seized the Koh-i-Noor. When he first laid eyes upon it, he is said to have gasped, whispering words that would seal the diamond's name for eternity. It is a mountain of light. The Mountain of Light had a new master, but the curse was patient. Just a few years later, Nader Shah was betrayed and murdered by his own men, his empire collapsing into ruin. The diamond, however, remained untarnished. It passed silently into new hands, as if mocking the futility of mortal power. Again and again the story repeated. Shahs assassinated, kings betrayed, sons poisoned by their kin. Whole kingdoms dissolved into dust while the diamond remained, shimmering with cold detachment. Chroniclers of the time began to whisper a darker thought that the stone was not merely cursed, but conscious, that it drank the blood of the ambitious, that it thrived on greed, that it was, in some ineffable way, alive. By the 19th century, the jewel fell into British hands. After the bloody annexation of Punjab, it was taken from a child, Duleep Singh, the 10-year-old Sikh ruler, forced to surrender both his crown and his sacred jewel. The stone was shipped to England, a gleaming trophy of empire. But even here, across oceans and centuries, its legend followed. Queen Victoria received the diamond, but curiously, she never placed it upon her own brow. Instead, she had it recut, its once massive form reduced, but made more brilliant, and set into the crown. Jewels. Whether she acted from superstition or simple caution, she obeyed the ancient warning. Only women could wear the Koh-i-Noor without fear. And indeed, no British king has ever dared place it upon his head. It remains, to this day, worn only by queens and queen consorts. Yet if the monarchs were spared, the empire itself was not. Britain's control over its vast dominion began to unravel in the decades after the jewel's arrival. Uprisings, mutinies, revolutions, shadows rippled outward, eroding the stability of the once mighty empire. Though history books may speak of politics, economics, and rebellion, some whisper that it was the Mountain of Light itself exacting its price. Today, the Koh-i-Noor rests under heavy guard in the Tower of London, displayed behind thick glass, admired by millions of visitors. Yet its presence is anything but peaceful. India demands its return. Pakistan demands it. Afghanistan claims it. Each nation insists the diamond belongs to them, and with every demand comes renewed tension, as if the jewel itself refuses to lie, still whispering in the ears of men, stoking division, unrest, and envy. Perhaps the most chilling truth of the Koh-i-Noor is its paradox. It is a symbol of wealth, beauty, and divine power. And yet, its history is written in ruin. Unlike a cursed book, which may sit forgotten in an attic, or a haunted monastery that decays quietly in solitude, the Koh-i-Noor's curse remains visible, alive, and present. It gleams still, not in secret, but in the open, watching, waiting, taunting. Some scholars argue that its curse is no supernatural affliction, but the simple truth of greed, that the pursuit of absolute power always ends in blood. But others whisper that the curse is more literal, that the stone has never been tamed, that it is the earthly shell of a divine wrath. The Mountain of Light has waited centuries, passing from hand to hand, empire to empire, never sated, never finished, and perhaps it waits still, for the downfall of its final keeper, for the last empire to collapse under its cold, dazzling stare. Some say the curse can only be broken if the jewel is returned to the temple from which it was first stolen thousands of years ago. But until that day, the Mountain of Light may yet demand more shadows. The Koh-i-Noor diamond stands as a reminder of an eternal truth. Beauty conceals horror, and power always demands a price. And as long as the Mountain of Light gleams, that price may never be paid in full. They say some curses are carved in stone, etched into ancient tombs, hidden beneath the dust of centuries. But others are younger, born not in forgotten ruins, but in modern times. Proof that the darkness doesn't belong only to history, but still lingers, waiting, whispering. Among all such modern curses, none is as feared, as infamous, or as deeply unsettling as the Dybbuk box. At first glance, it is nothing, just a small wooden wine cabinet, ordinary and unremarkable, the kind of thing you might stumble upon in a cluttered antique store. Its surface is worn with age, its hinges dull, its appearance giving no hint of the terror locked inside. Yet according to Jewish folklore, a Dybbuk is no ordinary ghost. It is a restless spirit, malevolent and unclean, cursed to wander the earth, searching endlessly for a host to cling to feed upon, to inhabit. And the box, they say, is its prison. The story begins in Portland, Oregon, in the year 2001. Kevin Mannis, a writer and antiques dealer, attended an estate sale. Among the furniture, books, and trinkets collected from a lifetime was this small cabinet. It had belonged to a Holocaust survivor named Havala, a woman whose family described her as both kind and deeply troubled. She had fled Europe after the war, carrying the scars of unspeakable horrors, and carrying, too, this strange little box. Before she passed away, she had told her family that the cabinet should never, under any circumstances, be opened. It contained something dark, something she had trapped long ago, something she had spent the rest of her life keeping locked away. Kevin Mannis, however, thought little of it. To him, it was simply an old wine cabinet, perhaps even valuable. He purchased it, ignoring the warnings, and brought it home. But almost immediately, The atmosphere around him began to shift. He described lights flickering for no reason, objects moving from their places, and the sudden overwhelming stench of ammonia or cat urine filling the air. At night, the real horrors began. Manus spoke of nightmares, vivid, suffocating dreams, in which a withered old hag crouched at his bedside, her face sunken, her eyes burning like coals. She pressed down on his chest, heavy as stone, making it impossible to breathe. He would wake drenched in sweat, his throat raw from screaming. Terrified, Manus attempted to give the box away, to rid himself of the presence he believed it carried. But every new owner fell victim to the same shadow that stalked him. One woman returned it within days, pale and shaking, insisting she could not sleep while it was in her house. Another man, once healthy, was struck suddenly with a stroke. A couple who took it in complained of a constant smell of rotting flowers, of shadows that stretched too long against the walls. Visitors described the same figure in their dreams, a shadow woman with sunken eyes, hair falling in strands, skin withered as though burned, always watching, always waiting. By the mid-2000s, the Dybbuk box was no longer a private terror. Stories of its curse began spreading online, and it eventually appeared on eBay, where its chilling reputation attracted even more attention. It was there that it came into the possession of Jason Haxton, a museum curator and scholar. Haxton, skeptical but intrigued, believed he could study the item with care. But soon, even he was forced to admit that the box was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Haxton's health began to crumble. He reported welts appearing on his skin as though something had clawed him. He coughed up blood without explanation, his lungs burning, his dreams filled with whispers and choking darkness. Electronics around him failed inexplicably. His home, filled with voices when no one else was present. He said the box carried an energy that was at once magnetic and repulsive, drawing him in even as it poisoned him. Fearing for his life, Haxton reached out to rabbis for help. Rituals were performed, ancient prayers chanted, salt circles drawn to contain the force that lived within. In the end, Haxton decided the only way to survive was to lock the box away. He sealed it in a hidden location, refusing to reveal where, hoping its darkness would stay buried. But the Dybbuk box does not rest. In fact, the more its story spread, the more powerful it seemed to become. Fear, after all, is a kind of fuel, and this box thrived on it. In 2012, Hollywood took notice. The horror film The Possession was inspired by its story, bringing the cursed object into the global spotlight. And soon after, the real box was acquired by Zach Bagans, the host of Ghost Adventures. Bagans, a man no stranger to the paranormal, placed the Dybbuk box in his Las Vegas haunted museum. There, it sits behind reinforced glass, displayed like a relic of terror. But even containment has not silenced it. Visitors often report sudden waves of nausea, uncontrollable dread, or faint voices whispering just beyond hearing. Some collapse in tears, their legs refusing to carry them closer. Bagans himself has admitted to terrifying experiences after interacting with the box: visions, blackouts, sensations of being strangled by invisible hands. And then came the incident with musician Post Malone. In 2018, Malone visited Bagans's museum and, against all caution, touched the Dybbuk box. Within weeks, a series of near-fatal accidents followed him like shadows. First, the tires of his private jet blew out during takeoff, forcing an emergency landing. Then, his home was broken into. Soon after, he was involved in a serious car crash. Coincidence? Skeptics argue yes, but to those who know the Dybbuk box, the pattern was undeniable. For every skeptic who dismisses the box as a hoax, there are countless believers who warn that something very real lurks within it. Perhaps it is not the wood or the hinges that are cursed, but the story itself. Perhaps fear alone gives the box its power, feeding it, strengthening it with every whisper, every shudder, every retelling. And if that is true, then even listening to its story may be a risk. Unlike cursed jewels locked away in vaults or tombs sealed under stone, the Dybbuk box is not hidden in the past. It exists here, now, in our own time. Its prison is fragile, its curse still active. It is proof that the supernatural does not belong only to legends, but walks beside us in the present, waiting to be acknowledged. And maybe that is what makes it most terrifying of all. For while ancient curses belong to the dead, the Dybbuk box belongs to the living. It waits in silence, its whispers curling through the glass, searching for the next soul foolish enough to open its doors. And once it is open, the darkness inside will never be locked away again. Because some prisons are not meant to hold forever, and some spirits once freed will not stop until they have found a home.